Sounds like you can't base any theories off of genetics because it's all interbreeding here and there. So you just have percentages, and you don't know how those percentages ended up there.
Well, let me talk a little bit about those percentages. This is how they play with numbers, and again, this is more politics than it has to do with science. Science, you would think, genetics is objective. You know, you would say, oh, yeah, genetics doesn't lie. You know, it's mathematically perfect, correct, exact. Right?
Not exact, but in the ballpark, I'd say.
Well, no, it's got to be exact because if I count, you know, so many DNA strings, or so many atoms. I mean, if you want to take it to the atomic level, let's count atoms.
Yeah, but
and we say,
oh, two specimens. You have to do it across many specimens.
That's one issue. But let's assume you finally concluded that you've got all these strings. Well, if you match the strings, you say, well, yeah, there's a 2%, a 4%, a 10% match. Because you just look at the strings, and that part is objective, or at least should be. Yeah. But it's not. Here you see how they play with the numbers. Here's Green 2010. This is on the seminal paper on the genome, right? The actual amount of interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern humans may have been limited, given that it contributed only 1 to 4% of the genome of present-day non-Africans. That's in 2010. Here's them. This is the same group. Some other people are in there. Proof for 2014. Using the high coverage Neanderthal genome in conjunction with the 2 other Neanderthal genomes, we now estimate that the proportion of Neandertal-derived DNA in people outside Africa is 1.5 to 2.1. So we went from 1 to 4 to 1.5 to 2.1. It used to be 4%, now we cut it in half to 2%. How can they make such a big error? That's a big error, that's 50%. And you think that stops. You know, here I have another case, because they want to show that the Neanderthals, humans lost a lot of the Neanderthal DNA over the years. That's how we ended up with 2%. You know, we had a lot more in the past, and here's an article that gives you an idea. It comes from Harris and Nielsen, 2016, and this is quoted by Newswise, a magazine that quotes them essentially. It says, today, Neanderthal sequences make up approximately 2% of the genome in people from non-African populations. But Harris and Nielsen estimate that at the time of interbreeding, long time ago, closer to 10% of the human migrants' genome would have been Neanderthal, because there were around 10 times more humans than Neanderthals. This number is consistent with the 2 groups acting as a single population that interbred at random. Recent DNA evidence has confirmed that the Neanderthal contribution to Eurasian genomes was higher in the past. Here's the Smithsonian, 2016, along the same lines. They don't go into numbers, but they give you a qualitative. They said, evaluation. The mutations humans acquired from Neanderthals are slowly being purged from the genome over time. Much of their DNA would be left behind during natural selection. What is the problem with all this? The problem is that they find a human skeleton in Siberia. It's a 45,000-year-old Siberian man, human man, a skeleton. And this is what they say. Listen to this. We present the high-quality genome. They do a full genome on this guy, right? We present the high-quality genome sequence of a 45,000-year-old modern human male from Siberia. We estimate that the proportion of Neanderthal admixture in the Ust-Ishim individual, that's the place, to be 2.3 plus or minus 0.3%, similar to present-day East Asians and present-day Europeans. In other words, here the prediction was that in the old days, they had to have 10%, and over time we lost a lot of Neanderthal DNA, and today we ended up with only 2%. They find this guy, this human in Siberia, he's got the same 2% that we do, and he had it 45,000 years ago, when supposedly the Neanderthals were still around. And to make matters worse, we have another study that just throws a bucket of water on the whole thing, cold water on the whole thing. It says, Lassi, 2014. Our analysis reveals strong support for Neanderthal admixture in Eurasia at a higher rate, 3.4 to 7.3%, than suggested previously. Using analysis and simulations, we show that our inference is more powerful than previous summary statistics and robust to realistic levels of recombination. In other words, they start out, they say, humans have between 1 and 4%. That was the original paper. Then they modify and say, well, not really, we kind of exaggerate, we boasted too much. We really only have 2% Neanderthal DNA. And we ended up with 2% because we originally had like 10% 50,000 years ago. Over the years we lost it, we ended up with 2%. So that's the logic. These guys come on and say, well, we found this human in Siberia, and he's only got 2%, just like we do, and he's 45,000 years old. And then these other guys come and say, oh, by the way, today we don't have 2%. We have 3 to 7%.
What? Today we have 3 to 7%?
Yeah, so we started out, let's go over that one more time.
Yeah.
We started out with 1 to 4%. That's what the first guy said. And remember, this is genetics, perfectly accurate, exact science, right? So they say, well, it's 1 to 4%. Then they say, well, not really, it's only 2%. Then they find a human that had 2% 45,000 years ago, just the same as what we have today. And then these guys do another study, and they say, oh, by the way, we have up to 7% Neanderthal DNA in us. So how did we end up, how did this Siberian man have 2% in the old days, 45,000 years ago, and today we ended up with 7% according to Lassie?
Sounds like they don't know what they're doing.
Well, it shows you that it's not an exact science, that these guys are just giving you their opinions. Whatever they're doing in those labs, it's not objective, it's subjective. They're just trying to prove admixture at all costs, and they're just playing around with the numbers. And here's the punchline, on this. Wang, 2012, okay? He does an analysis, or he essentially quotes 2 studies. And these 2 studies were done by geneticists, right? And they end up with opposite conclusions. They do the same mitochondrial DNA, in this case, study, and they end up with different conclusions. Gives you something to think about in regards to geneticists. Nguyen estimated that Neanderthals and modern humans diverged 706,000 years ago, thus supporting the earlier conclusion of Neanderthal negligible DNA contribution to the modern European gene pool. In contrast, Green calculated the average sequence divergence time between Neanderthals and modern humans as 516,000 years ago, and found a considerable level of admixture between Neanderthals and modern humans. So one guy ends up with 700,000 years ago. That's the point where we had a common ancestor. Yeah. The other guy ends up with 500,000 years. There's 200,000 years difference. That's the first one. This guy ends up saying there's no commonality with a Neanderthal, or very little. And this guy says, oh yeah, we had all kinds of sex with them and we are their offspring. So here you have they end up with all different kinds of conclusions, despite that they do the similar types of analysis on samples. So this gives you an idea, that you can't trust the geneticists for the conclusion they are reaching. You can trust the geneticists as far as you can throw them. All these people can do is offer opinions. They can count, strands of DNA. They can do that. That's objective. But their interpretation of that data, that's subjective. And the problem out there is that people believe that, geneticists, they're infallible because, they count, it's objective, it's mathematical, it's exact. Why should we doubt them? Yeah, the data, the sample is objective, but their interpretation of that data, their analysis, that's what's not objective.
If there's 23 whatever matches, they can count how many matches there are, but they can't infer what those matches means.
Right.
Or why we have that many matches.
Yeah, that's their personal interpretation. These guys are lab boys. That's all they are. They're lab technicians. That's all they are. They're not theorists. At least they're not expert theorists. What they're trying to do is accommodate their theory with a current, with a rising current in Neanderthal paleontology, which is admixture. So they say, oh, all these guys are fanatic about admixture. Let's give them proof. And they're coming out with data and fitting it to the theory just to become popular and to get funds and all this stuff.
It sounds like forensics, where you can state out the facts as detailed as you need them, or as objectively as you have them, but what to make of those facts are a different issue entirely.
That's left up to the lawyer.
Exactly.
The lawyer invents the theory.
Yeah.
The other guys produce the facts. And this is something similar. Here these guys are acting as lawyers, not as scientists.
Ooga. So, what do you think to the geeks that work at the Max Planck Institute? Well, let me tell you what I think. Cowabunga!